It was a day meant for flowers, for handmade cards, for breakfast in bed, a day to celebrate the woman who gives life, Mother's Day. But in the quiet suburbs of a Texas town, the morning of May 12, 2013, broke not with celebration, but with a scream that tore through the fabric of a peaceful neighborhood. Inside a modest family home, a scene of unimaginable violence had unfolded. David Martinez, a loving father and devoted husband, lay dead. He hadn't woken up to the smell of coffee or the laughter of his children. Instead, his life had been brutally stolen from him in the dead of night. It was a shocking, senseless act that left everyone asking the same question: why? The initial call to 911 painted a picture of pure chaos. A home invasion, they said. A robbery gone horribly wrong. The story was that masked intruders had burst into the Martinez home, demanding money and valuables before their rage turned deadly. It was the kind of random, terrifying violence that every family fears. The boogeyman in the night made real. The community was gripped by fear. Neighbors looked at each other with suspicion, locking their doors a little tighter. Who could have done this? And to such a good man, a family man, on a day that should have been filled with nothing but love and gratitude. The questions hung in the air, thick and heavy, like the morning fog. But as the sun rose higher, casting light on the horrific scene, something felt off. The story, as told by David's wife Maria, seemed to have holes in it. Small inconsistencies at first, the kind you might expect from someone in shock. But they were there, little threads that, if pulled, might unravel the entire narrative. The crime scene itself seemed strangely contained, not quite matching the frantic, desperate struggle of a typical home invasion. It was a puzzle, a deeply disturbing one, where the pieces just didn't seem to fit together. And at the center of it all was a grieving widow, whose tears seemed to hide something more complex than sorrow. The tragedy of it all was almost too much to bear. A father, gone, 2 children, their world shattered forever. And a Mother's Day that would now be an annual reminder of loss, a date scarred by violence and betrayal. In those first few hours, no one could have guessed the dark truth lurking just beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family. They saw only the aftermath of a brutal crime, a family torn apart by a cruel twist of fate. Or was it fate at all? As detectives began to sift through the evidence, they started to wonder if the real monster wasn't an intruder from the outside, but someone who had been inside all along. To anyone who knew them, David and Maria Martinez were the embodiment of the American dream. They had met young, fallen in love, and built a life together, brick by brick. David was the kind of man everyone respected. He was hardworking, a dedicated provider who put his family above all else. He coached his son's baseball team and never missed his daughter's dance recitals. He was the steady hand, the calm presence, the rock upon which the family was built. His friends would tell you he was always smiling, always ready with a helping hand or a friendly word. He was, by all accounts, a genuinely good man living a good life. Maria, on the other hand, was the vibrant heart of the family. She was outgoing, social, and deeply involved in her community and church. She organized neighborhood potlucks and school fundraisers, her energy seemingly boundless. Together, she and David appeared to be a perfect match, balancing each other out. They hosted barbecues in their backyard, their home filled with the sounds of children's laughter and friendly chatter. They posted smiling family photos online, vacations at the beach, birthday parties, holiday gatherings. It was a carefully curated image of happiness, a portrait of a loving family without a single crack in its foundation, or so it seemed. Their 2 children, a son and a daughter, were the center of their universe. They were bright, happy kids who adored their parents. The Martinez house was a place where their friends loved to gather, a welcoming space filled with warmth and affection. David taught his son how to throw a perfect spiral, while Maria helped her daughter with homework at the kitchen table. They were a team, a unit. They presented a united front to the world, a testament to what love and commitment could build. No one, not even their closest friends or family, suspected that behind the closed doors of their peaceful home, a storm was gathering. Looking back, it's this picture of normalcy that makes the story so chilling. It's a reminder that we never truly know what goes on in the lives of others. The Martinez family wasn't just an ordinary family. They were the family everyone wanted to be. They had the nice house, the 2 wonderful kids, the deep roots in their community. They had love. They had respect. They had it all. The idea that this idyllic picture could be hiding a dark and deadly secret was simply unthinkable. It was a facade so convincing, so complete, that its eventual collapse would send shockwaves far beyond their quiet little street. Every perfect picture has a hidden side, a part that is kept out of the frame. For the Martinez family, the first sign of trouble was financial. While they projected an image of stability, behind the scenes, a different story was playing out. David worked tirelessly to provide, but bills were piling up. There were whispers of credit card debt, of living just a little beyond their means. It's a common struggle, one that many families face. But in this case, the financial pressure was a symptom of a much deeper problem. It was a quiet stressor, adding weight to a foundation that was already beginning to crack under the strain of secrets. Just months before his death, David had made a significant change to his life insurance policy. He had increased the payout substantially, naming his wife Maria as the sole beneficiary. On the surface, it seemed like a responsible move for a family man wanting to ensure his loved ones were taken care of no matter what, a final act of love and provision. But in the grim light of a murder investigation, that same act took on a sinister new meaning. What was once a gesture of protection now looked like a motive. $1 million motive, to be exact. It was a detail that investigators would circle back to, again and again. And then there was the other secret, the one Maria kept hidden from everyone. While playing the part of the devoted wife, she was leading a double life. She had begun an affair with a man she had met through a shared hobby. His name was Jacob, and their relationship was a whirlwind of secret meetings and clandestine messages. It was a passionate, all-consuming affair that offered Maria an escape from the perceived mundanity of her life. She was no longer just a wife and mother. She was a woman desired, pursued. This secret life was a dangerous game, one that would ultimately set the stage for tragedy. The affair was more than just a betrayal, it was a catalyst. Maria began to see her husband not as her partner but as an obstacle. He was the person standing between her and this new, exciting life she imagined with her lover. The financial strain, combined with the illicit romance, created a toxic cocktail of desperation and desire. The life she had built with David was no longer enough. She wanted more. She wanted out. And as her secret world grew, so did a dark and terrible idea. An idea that would turn a secret affair into a cold-blooded conspiracy. When the first responders stepped across the threshold of the Martinez home, they were met with a chilling and contradictory scene. The story was a violent home invasion, yet the house was surprisingly neat. There were no drawers pulled out in a frantic search for valuables, no furniture overturned in a violent struggle. A television was missing, and a few items seemed out of place, but it all felt staged, like a poorly written play. The disarray was too clean, too deliberate. It was the first red flag, a silent signal that the narrative they had been given was deeply flawed. The truth, they suspected, was far more personal and far more sinister. In the master bedroom, the horror was real. David Martinez lay in his bed, the victim of a brutal and fatal attack. The violence had been swift, personal, and overwhelmingly one-sided. He appeared to have been killed in his sleep, with no chance to defend himself. It was a deeply intimate crime scene, contained almost entirely to the space where a husband and wife should feel safest. The contrast between the pristine state of the house and the savage nature of the murder was jarring. It didn't speak of random intruders, it spoke of a targeted assassination, an execution carried out with cold, calculated precision. And then, there was Maria. Her behavior in the aftermath was peculiar. For a woman who had just witnessed the brutal murder of her husband, she seemed remarkably composed. She answered questions with a strange detachment, her story shifting with each retelling. One moment she was a hysterical, grieving widow. The next she was calm and collected, recounting details with an unnerving clarity. Detectives are trained to read people, to look for the subtle cues that betray the truth. And with Maria, every instinct they had was screaming that something was wrong. Her grief didn't feel authentic, it felt like a performance. She told the police she had been tied up in the closet, a helpless victim forced to listen as her husband was killed. Yet, the bindings found at the scene were loose, easily escaped. She had no marks on her wrists, no signs of a struggle. Her story of the masked men felt rehearsed, lacking the raw, fragmented details of genuine trauma. It was a narrative full of plot holes, a story that crumbled under the slightest scrutiny. As the hours ticked by, the focus of the investigation began to shift away from faceless intruders and toward the one person who was there when it happened, the grieving widow herself. Leading the investigation was Detective Chen, a veteran investigator with a reputation for his methodical approach and his refusal to take anything at face value. He listened patiently to Maria's story of the home invasion, nodding along but seeing the cracks she couldn't hide. Chen believed that every crime tells a story, and the story of this crime scene wasn't adding up. He started where all good investigations begin, with the victim. He interviewed David's friends, family, and co-workers, and a consistent picture emerged. David was a good man, loved by all, with no known enemies. The idea of a random attack seemed less and less likely. The investigation then turned to the life David and Maria had built together. Chen's team began to dig into their finances, and what they found was telling. They uncovered the mounting debt, the credit cards pushed to their limit, and the financial stress that simmered just below the surface. And then, the critical piece, the recently increased life insurance policy. $1 million. It was a powerful motive, a life-changing sum of money for someone feeling trapped by their circumstances. For Detective Chen, it was a giant flashing arrow pointing directly at the sole beneficiary, Maria Martinez. The case was no longer about who, but why. The next breakthrough came from a place secrets often hide: a cell phone. An examination of Maria's phone records revealed a hidden world. Thousands of text messages, not to her husband but to another man. His name was Jacob, her lover. The messages painted a vivid picture of a passionate secret romance. They spoke of a future together, of a life free from their current obligations. More chillingly, they contained conversations about David. He was referred to as the problem, the obstacle that stood in their way. The affair was no longer just a betrayal, it was a conspiracy in the making. Armed with the motives of money and love, Detective Chen brought Maria in for another interview. This time, the questions were sharper, more direct. He confronted her with the financial records. He asked her about the life insurance. He laid out the text messages between her and Jacob. He watched as her composure began to crack, her carefully constructed story falling apart piece by piece. She denied everything, of course, sticking to her tale of masked intruders. But the lies were becoming more desperate, more transparent. Chen knew he was close. He just needed to find the people who had pulled the trigger. Detective Chen knew that Maria and her lover Jacob likely hadn't acted alone. The crime had been too violent, too hands-on. They were the masterminds, but they needed soldiers to carry out the deed. The investigation pivoted, searching for a link between the couple and someone capable of such brutality. The key came from an unexpected source, a tip from an anonymous caller. The caller mentioned a name, a teenager who had been bragging about being involved in something serious. That single name was the thread Chen needed to unravel the entire conspiracy. It led him to a group of local high school students. The first teenager they brought in was a 17-year-old boy named Michael. At first he was defiant, a scared kid trying to act tough. But under the weight of a murder investigation, his bravado quickly crumbled. He confessed. He told detectives that Maria's lover, Jacob, had recruited him. Jacob had spun a tale of desperation, claiming Maria was a victim of terrible abuse at David's hands. He offered Michael and his friends money, a few $1,000s each, to scare David. It was supposed to be a simple job, he said, just rough him up a bit, teach him a lesson. The teenagers, young and impressionable, believed the story and saw a chance for easy money. One confession led to another. The second teenager, a boy named Chris, broke down almost immediately. He filled in the horrifying details of that night. He confirmed that Jacob had hired them, feeding them lies about David's supposed abuse to justify the act. He described how they had entered the house through a back door that Maria had intentionally left unlocked. They weren't masked intruders who had broken in, they were invited guests with a deadly purpose. Their job was to make it look like a robbery, to create the illusion of random violence while Maria waited in the closet, playing the part of the victim. The teenagers' stories were sickeningly consistent. They detailed how Maria had planned it all, guiding them on what to do and what to take to make the robbery look convincing. She was the architect of her own husband's murder, using these young, misguided boys as her weapons. They had been manipulated, fed a false narrative of heroism, and paid a pittance to destroy a family. Their confessions provided Detective Chen with the final pieces of the puzzle. He now had the masterminds and the triggermen. The web of deceit, spun by Maria Martinez, had finally been exposed for all to see. With the teenagers' confessions in hand, the case against Maria Martinez solidified from suspicion to certainty. The evidence was overwhelming, a mountain of proof that exposed her intricate web of lies. Investigators found handwritten notes, passed between Maria and her lover Jacob, outlining the plan. These weren't just love letters, they were blueprints for a murder. They discussed alibis, payment for the hired teens, and how to stage the scene. It was a chilling, step-by-step guide to killing her husband, written in her own hand. The notes were a direct window into her cold and calculating mind. The digital trail was just as damning. Text messages recovered from the phones of everyone involved corroborated the teenager's stories perfectly. The messages showed Maria coordinating with Jacob, who in turn was directing the young recruits. They discussed the layout of the house, the best time to strike, and the lie they would all tell. Furthermore, investigators found Maria's personal journal. In its pages, she didn't write of love for her husband but of resentment and a desperate desire for a different life. It was a narrative of a woman who felt trapped and saw murder as her only way out. Perhaps the most cynical part of her plan was the lie about abuse. In the days leading up to the murder, Maria had started documenting non-existent injuries and telling close friends that David was hurting her. It was a calculated, preemptive strike designed to create sympathy for her and cast suspicion on David should anything happen. She was laying the groundwork for a defense, planting seeds of doubt long before the crime was even committed. But investigators found no evidence to support her claims. Friends and family described David as gentle and loving, the complete opposite of the monster she tried to portray. Her lie was a cruel and final insult to the man she had vowed to love. When confronted with this mountain of evidence, the notes, the texts, the journal, the confessions, Maria's facade finally shattered. Her story of the home invasion was exposed as a complete fabrication. She was not a victim, she was the orchestrator. She had manipulated her lover, lied to her friends, and exploited impressionable teenagers, all to get what she wanted, her husband's life insurance money and a future with a new man. The image of the grieving widow was replaced by the stark reality of a cold-blooded killer who had meticulously planned her husband's demise. The unraveling was complete. The trial was a somber affair, a public airing of a family's darkest secrets. The courtroom was packed, the community desperate to understand how such a thing could happen. One by one, the conspirators faced justice. The teenagers, who had been manipulated into committing a heinous act, were tried for their roles. Their defense argued they were victims of a sophisticated manipulation, but the fact remained that they had taken a life. They were found guilty and received lengthy prison sentences, their youthful mistakes costing them decades of their lives. Their futures, like David's, were stolen that night. Next came Jacob, Maria's lover. His trial revealed him as a weak man, easily led by Maria's desires and her promises of a life together funded by insurance money. He had been the middleman, the recruiter who had poisoned the minds of the teenagers with lies about abuse. He claimed he only wanted to help the woman he loved escape a bad situation, but the prosecution painted a different picture, one of a greedy accomplice who was just as culpable as the person who conceived the plan. He too was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison, his illicit romance ending not in happiness but in a prison cell. Finally, it was Maria's turn. She stood before the court, no longer the grieving widow but the accused mastermind. Her defense team tried to portray her as a battered woman, a victim who had snapped under years of abuse. But the prosecution systematically dismantled this narrative. They presented the evidence, the journal entries filled with resentment, not fear. The text messages planning the crime, the life insurance policy. They called David's friends and family to the stand, who all testified to his gentle nature. The jury saw through the lies. They saw a woman motivated by greed and lust, not by fear. The verdict was swift and decisive, guilty of capital murder. The judge handed down the only sentence possible for such a cold and calculated crime, life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Justice, in the eyes of the law, had been served. Maria Martinez would spend the rest of her days behind bars, a prisoner of the very plan she had designed to set herself free. There would be no $1-million payout, no new life with her lover. There would only be the four walls of a cell, and the memory of the family she had single-handedly destroyed. The gavel fell, and the prison doors closed, but the story doesn't end there. For David Martinez's children, the verdict was not a conclusion but the beginning of a new, painful reality. Their lives were irrevocably fractured. They had lost their father to a brutal act of violence, and then they lost their mother to the horrifying truth of her betrayal. They were left orphaned, not by fate but by a monstrous choice. The home that was once filled with love and laughter became a crime scene, a place of ghosts and unbearable memories. The shadow of their mother's deceit would linger over them for the rest of their lives. In the years that followed, these two children had to navigate a world without the parents they knew. They were raised by relatives, who did their best to shield them from the darkness and provide a stable, loving environment. They were faced with an impossible choice: how to remember their parents. How do you reconcile the memory of a loving mother with the knowledge that she was a cold-blooded murderer? How do you honor a father whose life was stolen by the person who was supposed to protect him? It's a burden no child should ever have to carry. Yet, in the face of unimaginable tragedy, they chose to honor the truth. They chose to remember their father David for the man he truly was, a kind, dedicated, and loving dad. They refused to let their mother's evil erase the goodness he brought into the world. They carry his memory forward, a testament to the love that was real, even when it was surrounded by lies. Their strength and resilience are perhaps the only glimmers of light in this dark and sordid tale. They are David's true legacy, a legacy of survival and enduring love. And so, this story serves as a chilling reminder. It warns us that evil doesn't always wear a mask or carry a sign. Sometimes it sits across from you at the dinner table. It smiles in family photos and organizes neighborhood potlucks. It can be hidden behind a familiar face, a loving touch, and a gentle voice. The Martinez family looked perfect from the outside, a beacon of suburban happiness. But beneath the surface, a deadly secret festered. It teaches us a hard lesson. You can never truly know what lies in the heart of another person. And sometimes, you can't spot the killer, even when they're sleeping right next to you.